Everyone, and welcome to the first hybrid meeting of the Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel. It's 6:30 on Monday, July 26, 2021. And hopefully that we're returning to some semblance of normalcy in our lives, and it's good to see everyone, or most of us, well, maybe 55% of us in a brick and mortar scenario tonight. And we do have some people Zooming in today. I just want to go over a couple of things before we get into the agenda. The individuals who are here, brick and mortar present, you have a microphone in front of you. If the green light is on, that means you are live. So turn the microphone on when you're speaking, and please turn it off when you're done speaking. Vice Chair Dubois is logged into her laptop tonight. She's going to be managing the meeting. So she is in part of the Zoom where those of us in the room can look to the screen on the back of the wall, and we can see the individuals participating remotely. They, in turn, will see what the live feed is at home through PAC television. So right now, the camera is on me. That's what they're seeing, and obviously the camera will follow around the room when various individuals at the table speak. So we're going to go into what we always do when we start off these meetings. We're going to call the roll, so we can go through and get proper attendance to people who are participating tonight. My name is John Mahoney. I chair the committee, and I'm a delegate from the Plymouth Select Board. How about we'll go to my left first, over to Mr. Nichols.
Thank you. David Nichols, appointed by Governor Baker.
Pat O'Brien, Senior Manager, Government Affairs and Communications for CDI, representing Holtec.
Mary Manford, appointed by the Senate President.
Seth Pickering from Mass DEP. I'm represented for EEA.
Rich Rothstein, Town of Plymouth Board of Selectmen appointee.
Paul Smith, representative of the Utility Workers Union of America, representing the business and women
Good evening. Robert Jones, representing Secretary Mary Lou Sutters, Health and Human Services.
Good evening, Rich Grassi, an appointee of the Minority Leader of the House.
Pine Dubois, appointed by the President of the House of Representatives.
I'd like to have the individuals who I see up on the screen participating remotely just go through the roll. I can't, I don't know if you can call them off left to right, top right. Is that Mr. Priest? Yes. Top left, so Jack Priest.
Jack Priest, representing Mass Department of Public Health.
Next one, Matt. Matt Daly.
Matt Daly with Environmental Resources Management, Environmental Consultant to Holtec Decommissioning International.
Mr. Noyes.
Dave Noyes, CDI Holtec.
Mary Waldron, Old Colony Planning Council. Good evening.
And then Susan.
Hi, Susan. Representing Secretary Mike Keneally for the Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development.
And then John.
John Dubinsky with ERM, a licensed site professional for the project.
John Viveris, representing the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency.
John Moylan, Site Vice President, Building Station.
Bob Hayden, Department of Public Utilities.
Thanks, Bob.
And Gerard Martin with Mass DEP.
And you have a follow-up question? You got it now?
Who's to the left of John Moylan?
Viveros.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone for checking in. We've got the attendance straight. We'll move on to the first agenda item, which is previous minutes review for approval.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
I have a couple of changes to the members not present. Rich, you weren't present at that meeting last week, were you? Last month?
In May?
Oh, no, you were here, yeah.
I thought I gave a
Yeah, you were.
presentation.
Yeah,
Maybe
you were.
my
No, it was
body
Rich.
doubled.
It was Richard Quintal, I think, that wasn't here.
Yes.
All right, sorry, it didn't get corrected when I corrected it. think that's really it.
Mary, hold on. Pine, you all set?
Okay, oh, she can comment. Let me look.
All right, go ahead, Mary.
Yes, line 10, page 4. Could you add that as a follow-up question to be asked? Mr. Priest indicated it's still a reasonable question when the spent fuel will be decommissioned and when the support equipment needed to keep the fuel covered and cool will no longer exist. Then line 35 and 36, Mr. Noyes asked a question, so that should be ticked because we're keeping track of questions. Page 5, Marsum is not spelled U-M, it's I-M, I believe. 22 on that page, a question on analysis of groundwater flow directions. And will that include a description given of the modeling that will be used to track the flow? 25, another question, characterization beneath the buildings. Question also beside the buildings. Next page, page 6, line 30. Fukushima wells was pointed out from a site characterization perspective. They're not the best wells to understand the presence or absence of radiological or non-radiological impacts. Therefore, they're going to be substitutes for those. Next page, I'm almost finished, but I did read them. Page 7, line 14. Mr. Priest said the background level is well understood, and I hope he can give an explanation to that. Page 9, line 13. Pat-down searches can be conducted in lieu of firearms detection, and guards can do surveillance and assessment, but do not have to do video surveillance. Was this provided by exemption? And if so, could someone provide what that NRC exemption is? And then last, page 10, line 43 to 47, could you clarify, because you're talking about the amended site assessment materials were presented at the meeting, but I think it would be important to indicate the date at which they were made public. And thank you for doing these minutes. They're very comprehensive.
Can I step forward?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Mary, I had most of those. I didn't have them all. I think we have to figure out how we're going to implement the suggestions made by Jack Priest in that the template that he was able to send out to us. We'll discuss that at the end of the meeting. I have an additional bunch of them, but I think we should discuss that. So I concur with what you said, but I don't know how to take up the meeting's time with my other highlights. Want me to just submit those in, or?
You mean proposed changes?
No, it's just, you know, adding follow-up questions to future meetings and clarification. So we brought things up at the meeting that we want to either expand on or answer or address.
And some of this has been falling through the cracks, and we're trying to streamline the process.
Yeah, we're trying to streamline things.
So that we're not redundant, but we are actually answering questions.
Right.
And so you'd like to come back and visit that at the end of the meeting, but right now, we just want to make sure that we...
Yeah, but I had no changes to the minutes themselves.
Okay. Mary, as far as changes to the minutes, did you have any?
Well, spelling.
Okay.
Yeah, the
All right, we
Marsden I
that
got
one.
too,
All right.
so that'll go in.
And I am the worst speller.
No, there's a number of that. I think it was just a misunderstanding about what it stood for.
All right, so we had a motion There was a second.
Oh, but one thing I wanted to add was when the material was, extended site characterization was made available to the public, because I think that's very important in the way it's written in the minutes. It's a little unclear.
It was sent out,
What's the line number you're asking, Mary?
Cripes. It's the last page. 46
on 10.
on page 10.
There's a date next to it, though.
so Pat
That's
O'Brien sent,
That's the date, wait, that's the date that Holtec provided the environmental site assessment.
Yes, to the
So
panel, I presume.
That's what we're recording here.
Okay. Maybe it could be added when it was made available to the
June
public. No, let's not waste time.
it was sent to me on June 2nd. I sent it to the state for publication on the website.
Okay,
How's that?
great.
Any other proposed changes to the minutes? Okay, so we had a motion, we had a second. Quick thorough discussion. All those in favor in approving the minutes as amended?
Aye.
Guys, raise your hand on the screen. Can you raise your hand up, or?
It was hard to hear that the roll was being called.
Okay, all those in favor in approval of the meeting minutes as amended? Yeah. I apologize, Mary, I don't think my microphone was on. Okay, so does that look like it was a unanimous?
Just ask for any opposition
Yeah, all right. Any opposed to the approval of the meeting minutes?
or abstention.
Or abstentions? Okay, so it's unanimous. All right, next agenda item. Moving on. Update from Holtec CDI, Mr. Patrick O'Brien.
Good evening. Nice to see a lot of these faces in public. It's been a little while. Just provide a brief update. I have a couple of colleagues on the Zoom that'll jump in on some of these slides as well as when we get to them. So the timeline I think everyone's familiar with just shows that we've moved up, and really the key, I don't know if I can hit it with the red light here. Right in here, we've begun the final fuel campaign for the site that began earlier this month, and I'll explain where we are progress-wise, but that's kind of the key change from last meeting. So demolition segmentation continue. We did take down the K4 building. It is a sheet metal building similar to a number of the other outbuildings that we've taken down. Since our last meeting, that's the only piece that's come down. Our next scheduled work for 2021 related to demolition, we do have the old access building. That'll come down third quarter. The old executive administration building, which is the one that's attached to the turbine building, that will come down third quarter. Main warehouse, we'll work through that over the remainder of 2021. That's a pretty large building with intricate connections in, so we're working through that. The operations and maintenance building, we have relocated everyone from inside the protected area that's not required to be inside the protected area, so the support staff out to the engineering support building. We're working through gapping the air off gas building, the AOG building, and the south end of the turbine building. Gapping, so, sorry. Sorry, I appreciate that question, actually. So that's taking out power systems, removing equipment, basically making it safe to then remove. So, you know, when we say gapping, it's really making sure that there's no electrical connections. You don't want to cut into a live wire. So things along those lines of just basically disconnecting it so it can be removed. We continue to do some waste reduction work inside the dryer separator pit in parallel to the fuel campaign. I know it's a little hard to see, but this is a picture from underwater. So these would be, when I talked about segmentation of think it was the dryer separator. There are these tubes that are part of that were each cut up individually. What this right here is called the crusher tube. It comes over and flattens it out. So it basically allows us to produce less waste by putting more waste into a waste box when it gets shipped. So it's less vehicle trips on the road. These are low-level waste. I think A and B waste, I believe. So we're working through that right now in parallel. Just a kind of an update on general on waste management. We've done a number of shipments to the West Texas facility already, and we have a number planned this quarter. Most of those low-level, removing the final pieces of those of you that have come down and seen the site. The reactor shield blocks will be the next ones going. That'll be the final shipment of those large concrete structures. That's truck to rail. We will continue with Class A shipments early in 2022, but as you can see down on the bottom, we've been pretty consistently shipping out low-level waste along the project. So the key where we are and where we're focused on at the site is this final fuel campaign. So we have completed the 4th cask of the 34 that was done last week, went out onto the current pad at that time. Cask 5 loading is underway. The multi-purpose canister is inside the fuel pool right now being loaded. The NRC was on site last week to observe the fuel campaign, including a visit by the regional administrator, and they will be observing our dry run from the lower pad to the upper pad this coming week. Beginning next week, we'll start to move some of those full casks that had been on the lower pad to the upper pad. Our campaign remains on track. We do anticipate finishing before the end of November, and then following that, we will be providing the 2 greater than Class C non-fuel waste containers that will be on the pad as well up to the upper pad for final storage until we can hopefully ship off-site or the DOE comes and gets it.
Quick question, Patrick.
Sure.
What time frames involve transferring the casks from the lower pad to the new upper pad?
In what sense, sorry?
Well, days, a week?
It's through the process, so we'll move in between while we're loading the new casks and bringing them out. So it's
okay.
Yeah,
It's not like everything all at once.
No. And how they're getting moved, I should have put a picture in it, sorry. There's, you'll bring the vertical cask transporter out, which I think I've shown before. That'll go on to what's called a Goldhofer. It looks like a tractor trailer bed. It's all independently, all the wheels move independently, and that's controlled. That'll come up to the upper pad, and then the VCT will be up top to take the cask off up there. So it's a little bit of a process, but it's one that those dry runs we've been doing starting last week, and then the ones that'll be observed this week by the NRC. We've been working through that process.
Mr. Grassi.
Thanks, Patrick. I was down at the IFSS High about a week ago, and there were, I think, approximately 6 casks on the pad. I was told back in May by Brian and yourself that your campaign that started in June would be to take it out of the spent fuel pool, put it in the cask, secure the cask, and move it up to ISFSI 2.
Correct.
So my question is, are all the casks on the upper pad full?
No.
No.
There's not any full casks up there. We staged some empty casks to allow for spacing up there when we got them delivered, but none of the casks that are up there right now. We won't move loaded fuel up there until next week.
Why are the casks on the pad?
Because we space.
To store them?
You've seen the other pad that's lower, so it's to ensure that we have the proper amount of storage. So as we move a full cask up, we'll probably grab the other one and bring it back down as we kind of shuffle through the whole process.
Okay, thank you, Patrick.
2 questions, please.
Mary?
One, okay.
Yes, go ahead.
I should be asking you, I guess, and not Pat. However, will you be making runs on a 24-hour schedule to bring them up? And if so, what would be the shifts of the security?
I'd have to double check. So I know our fuel campaign to load will be 24/7. I don't know about the movements up and down. The anticipation is we'd be doing loading new about 2.5 casts a week. And then in the interim times when we're loading, we would be moving stuff up to the pad.
Okay, and the second question is, are the security personnel, I understand there are going to be 6 running beside?
I can't say exact numbers
or
for safeguard reasons.
whoever they
but
are.
They are.
And are they all trained, or are these new kids on the block?
No, they're all trained. We work, security works 12-hour shifts as a rule. We have procedures that we follow for the amount of time that they can work in a week, in a day. There's a procedure that we follow that's an internal procedure that matches the fatigue rules that the NRC has.
Which are new, yeah. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, John.
Patrick, so you started the dry runs a week ago, you said. So how many dry runs can you say? How many you did?
I'll ask Mr. Moylan to speak to it. I know he's on.
I'm here, Pat. We've been up and down that hill approximately 4 times. We have another one for tomorrow. And we've got some learnings and some adjustments we've made, but we are ready for the dry run this week with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
So there was no unforeseen variables in the 4 runs you've done so far?
No, you know, there are always things you can learn, but nothing that we can't overcome or nothing that's going to jeopardize the project. So a lot of it is technique, and then a lot of it is where these crews are walking and how they're walking, and what they're doing and how they're communicating. And we're focused on bringing it up safely, making sure the crews are exposed, and understand how the vehicles are working while we're transporting.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. We've recently had an uptick in interest from local stakeholders. So we did have a visit last week from the Select Board Chairman, Mr. Quintal. It's the first time he'd been on site, I think, since he's gotten reelected, but I know he'd been on previously in his last time on the board. He came down with the planning director. They met with the NRC regional administrator, and then I took them on a site tour. We're looking to get back to the table with the town on pilot negotiations. I think everyone knows my updates over the last few months. The pilot agreement did expire June 30th. We're working with the assessor's office to provide them some information, but there is a desire, I think, from both sides to get back to the table. And we did, in good faith, pay our first quarter tax bill based on their initial assessment, which they have not changed the assessment from last year. So it's based off of their thought that they would get $6.5 million for the year. We did pay that first quarter tax bill of $1.6 million, just so we can continue to negotiate in good faith. And then I know Mary's going to speak to this a lot later. We did have 4 members of the Duxbury Select Board and 3 members of the Nuclear Matters Committee come down and tour the site and meet with our site leadership, including John Moylan, Dave Noyes, myself, and our operations manager, Joe McDonough. Environmental, I'm going to ask Dave Noyes to speak to this next slide.
Thanks, Pat. So we have commenced phase 1 alpha and phase 2 of the site characterization. Is that the slide, Pat, or are we in the?
No, this is this is the environmental talking points that you asked me to put in related to discharges.
Thanks, I appreciate that. We're coming up on the first semi-annual report that's due to DEP and EPA on the administrative order of consent that was issued against the NEPD's permit. In evaluating our performance, thought it would be useful to update NDCAP on where we are with respect to the administrative order of consent. So the consent order recognized that the plant would continue to cool the spent fuel pool. And as we reduce the quantity of fuel and the energy of that fuel, we would, in the October timeframe, come into compliance with the NEPD's permit with respect to the differential temperature that is established for the salt surface water, which is the cooling media. So we are well within the administrative order of consent. We have completed the one-time sampling on all of the manways that connect to our underground cable vaults. We have essentially been at a very small fraction of the allowed differential temperature that's established under the administrative consent order, roughly 10% or less of the temperature that is covered in the order. Through some effective water management techniques that the operations organization has established, there have been no discharges through the permitted outfalls associated with the neutralizing sump or the makeup demineralizer overflow. We also have not chlorinated during the period of the implementation of the new NEPDES permit.
With that, I'm going to ask, it's either Matt or John from ERM to speak to site characterization.
Matt, you want to take that?
Yeah. Thank you, Patrick. So again, this is Matt Daly with ERM. So just going to give an update here with regards to the continued iterative site characterization that's going on at the site. So just a couple of activities here. Since we had the last NDCAP meeting, we now have the official notice of responsible letter that was issued by Mass DEP for some of those soil and groundwater exceedances that were reported back in April of 2021. So that notice of responsibility letter essentially brings the site into the Massachusetts contingency plan and the regulatory program that the state of Massachusetts has for the assessment and cleanup and ultimate closure of those non-radiological impacts. The first phase in the MCP schedule will be for what they call a phase 1 report, as well as a tier classification report with a 1-year deadline from when those exceedances were initially reported to the state of Massachusetts. So that deadline will be April 21st, 2022. And again, these are for the soil and groundwater reportable concentration exceedances that were identified during that initial characterization event at the site. Since we, I think last talked, we've come up with a radiological soil sampling program with Massachusetts Department of Public Health for the licensed perimeter areas. So as part of the environmental site assessment report, there was information in there with regards to what was our plans for the next iterative phase of site characterization, and a portion of that was what they call the licensed perimeter areas. So as part of DPH's review of that material, they decided that they wanted to do some split sampling for radiological soil analysis. They had requested a number of specific locations where they wanted to collect the split samples, and those samples are being collected as we speak. And it's Mass Department of Public Health's intent to go analyze those soil samples at their laboratory of their choice. And obviously there'll be a split sample that CDI and Holtec analyzes through their own laboratory. And at some point, those two data sets will come together to look at the assurance of the quality between the two different laboratories. And, this kind of augments, I think, the 10 plus years of split sampling that's been going on between this site and the Massachusetts Department of Public Health with regards to the tritium and groundwater program at the site. Next slide, please. So as an update with regards to the additional site characterization that's happening on the main parcel area, these were identified in the environmental site assessment report as essentially some of the initial data gaps. So there was some difficulties in site conditions or equipment mechanical issues with the drilling equipment, so we couldn't get these samples the first go around. So we've mobilized back to the site to kind of go back and collect those samples so that we essentially collect all of the data, all of the samples that were initially contemplated in those December 2020 plans that went into DPH as well as Mass DEP. And as this little table at the bottom just kind of summarizes the different areas of the site, the WOCA, the west owner control area, the two shaded green areas kind of on the western side of the site map that we have on the slide. The work plan identifies that there's 4 soil borings that will ultimately be completed as monitoring wells. And currently we've got 3 of those monitoring wells constructed, and we're on the last one as we speak now. And then our kind of next steps are to go through a well development to make sure that that well is communicating with the aquifer, And then we would commence a groundwater sampling as it's outlined in the environmental site assessment. In the EOCA, the eastern owner control area, that's kind of the two on the far right, kind of the beige and very light yellow colors. We've got 4 soil borings and 3 monitoring wells targeted to go in there at this point in time. We've gone through the vacuum excavation clearance activities to make sure that when the drilling rig goes out to those locations, they will not be penetrating any kind of subsurface electrical or other kind of water conveyance lines. And so we still have to finish all of the drilling, the sampling, and the well installation out there. We still have the 2 sediment samples in the EOCA that were identified as, they were not collected during the first go around, and we're still discussing internally methodologies to collect those sediment samples. And then in the south owner control area, the 2 blue shades to the south portion of this map, we've got 1 soil boring and 1 monitoring well that is targeted for installation in there. And we've also got 2 additional wells in the light red or pink area, wells that couldn't be installed last fall of 2020 just due to encountering some subsurface obstructions, but those wells will be going here probably in an August timeframe. Next slide, Patrick. So here's a slide just kind of bringing everybody up to speed with regards to the additional site characterization, where we stand with those licensed perimeter areas. And those licensed perimeter areas we're showing you on this figure. We've got the Para 1 area, that's the former Greenwood estate, small parcel right on the ocean front. We've got the Para 2 area, which is kind of the corridor immediately south of Rocky Hill Road. And then we've got the Para 3 area, which is the larger corridor that's kind of along Powerhouse Road coming from south to north into the site. And it's these 3 areas that the split sampling with the Massachusetts Department of Public Health is currently ongoing with regards for soil samples and splitting those soil samples for radiological analysis. So in the table at the bottom of the slide, for all 3 sites, Para 1, Para 2, Para 3, the work plan calls for doing soil screening, soil sampling, advancing soil borings, and then ultimately constructing new monitoring wells. At this point in time, the work that's been completed is the superficial soil sampling that's been going underneath the radiological sampling program. And once the drill rig finishes up with all of the main site parcel area locations, that drill rig will be mobilizing over to these 3 parasites to do the soil boring, the deeper soil borings where we need that drilling technology to get us down deeper, and ultimately putting in some monitoring wells that will then ultimately be sampled for groundwater quality. I think that's our last slide, Patrick.
It is. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Matt.
Good, Matt. Dave?
Yeah, I'm curious, it's very evident to me that, stuff's coming down. The plant is moving and progressing to the point where somewhere down the road, you're going to release the land. Regardless of who you release it to, the land, you've got to get it down to 10 millirem, right? And so and I understand this is important to know what you've got, but when you get closer to the finish, how do you evaluate whether the land is below that 10 millirem? Does this process start over again?
It's iterative throughout the entire project. So the best way it's been described to me is picture the reactor building as a bullseye. Mm-hmm. You're working your way in and sampling and understanding what's there. And as you do that, you come to eventually what's called final status survey, and it explains how you would release the land and what you would do to remediate or monitor or whatever the final decision is to get you below the agreed upon standards.
So that happens you're going to do like a check at the end too to say before
Correct.
You release it.
Yeah, it cannot be released unless the NRC says, yes, we've agreed to everything that, you guys said you would do at the federal level. And then we have the separate agreement with the Commonwealth on how we get to 10 millirem. And there is, in that AG's agreement, there's some pieces where if we get below 25 but don't get quite to 10, there's a certain period of time that we have to be able to get to 10. That's as part of that deal as well. So it's all structured out, and we'll work obviously with the regulating agencies on those.
So do you think that'll happen in a phased approach, or is it kind of all at once? Okay, everything's gone, we've cleared the land, and we'll just kind of check each of these boxes off?
To release the land, you're asking?
Well, to say that you're below 10, mm-hmm. right? Like if you have a section that's below 10 tomorrow.
So releasing, it's
do you
more of
kind
a challenge to,
that
yeah,
off,
it's
right?
more of a challenge to release the land piecemeal. So you'd want to do it at once. And that's why, just as an aside, like, there's been a lot of interest, obviously, in the land, and, you know, some of this land that we're on now across the street that you assume is unimpacted, we're going through that process, it may come back and, all right, it's unimpacted. Well, people might want that earlier. Our intention is to do one site release when we come down to the NRC.
Right.
And it's just not, it's a lot of work, let's put it that way, to get it
Okay.
released, so that would be the plan.
And I understand, you know, if there's soil that's contaminated, and I don't think you found any that's radiologically contaminated yet, right? But if there is soil that you find that's contaminated, that's usually just a function of scooping up the dirt, right?
It depends on what's there, and I'm not the technical, John and Matt may know, because I know they had the experience out at Yankee Row. Might be able to speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, it depends what's in the soil, and there are regulatory standards that we have to meet to come to closure. So we will look at all that, and there will be a risk assessment conducted to make sure that the risks are appropriate for the uses. And right now, the use we're planning on is residential use, which is the strictest cleanup goal.
Okay.
So there are various methods of doing it. Typically, it's excavation, but there may be encapsulation, but at the end of the day, we'll be in conformance with the Massachusetts contingency plan.
Okay.
Hold on, I just want to double check what John
Yeah.
just said. The intention's not, I know he said residential, it's the residential standard is what we're trying to get to. It's not necessarily that we would then be building houses on it.
I
just wanna make
caught
sure
that-
that's
I
clear.
caught that one, too.
Heard a couple of gasps in the room, so I wanted to make sure that was understood.
So then, I mean, I understand the soil,
that's
but then
a
how do you remediate groundwater if you find groundwater contamination? Because that's not a function of just scooping up dirt.
I would ask John and those guys again, because I think there's certain requirements depending, again, on what you find.
Right. It depends what's in the groundwater. Some groundwater attenuates naturally. Other groundwater systems have to pump and treat, and sometimes we have to inject chemicals. So it depends what we find in the groundwater. The groundwater there is drinking water quality, so we have to meet the drinking water standard. So as we go forward, we'll work with Gerard and DEP to figure out if we need the appropriate remedial response actions for addressing groundwater. But the groundwater standard there would be drinking water.
Okay, thank you. And I get that you haven't found anything yet. I'm just thinking through what the release
That's
process
good.
is going to
Good
be.
questions.
Just to be sure, we did find some exceedances in the groundwater, and it exceeded the drinking water standard at 2 locations, but we're working through that process, just to be clear.
Got it, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rothstein?
Question for our ERM folks. I live about 4 miles south of the Pilgrim plant, and a number of the houses, including mine, have radon mitigation systems. Granite boulders brought down from northern New England during the Pleistocene glaciation period. I'm just curious, you don't have to have a big hillside. It could be, you know, in terms of the granite boulders, they could be down, buried, what have you there. Is there a possibility of any radon gas affecting trying to achieve the 10 millirem level, or how you could determine, is this coming from something that was buried or just naturally occurring, for example, radon?
So we're looking for radionuclides that are tied to plant operation. That's essentially what we're trying to characterize, and that's what's subject to the regulatory program for cleanup. So if there is radon out there, that's not something that's going to get pulled into, you know, the characterization program, because that's not associated with historic operation of the plant. So that would be a radionuclide that's not associated with plant operation. So it's kind of outside the scope of site characterization. We're looking for cobalt-60, cesium-137, other gamma-emitting radionuclides that are associated with the fission process that have been known at other sites. And we're looking to identify, confirm, or deny their presence or absence here, which would be, you know, if discovered at concentrations, that would be indicative of something that happened at the plant historically. And they would have to work their way through the Marson process and the final status survey process that was just talked through. And if the concentrations are high enough, they would potentially be subject to remediation. Ultimately, all of those licensed materials have to get to that, you know, 25 millirem standard for NRC, and ultimately the 10 millirem standard for the state of Massachusetts.
If a site area was marginally exceeding the 10 millirem, but you didn't see anything from all the sampling and analysis done in terms of the radionuclides that would be characterized from the plant operations, then you would say that, well, this could be just coming from other natural sources, like such as radon from granite buried under the ground. That's what I'm
Can
assuming.
I help, Matt?
Yep.
Sure, yes.
Very good, Jack.
Okay, so ultimately it'll be my staff, probably myself, that are doing this review of the analytical work that the LSP and their contract support will be doing. And as far as radon, we've got over 40 years of environmental data on the site. And you can read that today if you want to go look up the annual environmental operating report and the pre-operational reviews that were done before the plane even started operating. So that's some of the historical data that we would use as comparative data. So Matt and John are correct. We'll be looking for radioactive material associated, byproduct material associated with the operating of the plant. So one of the radionuclides you heard mentioned was cesium-137. There's cesium-137 in the environment left over from atomic testing. Background numbers for that radionuclide are well established in the state and across the country. So we'd be looking for anomalies from what those background numbers are. John talked about cleanup of soil. So first choice is scoop it up, excavate it, and get it off site and refilled cleanly. He mentioned the word encapsulation. That's not one of our favorable options. He talked about the resident model. It's actually a resident farmer model. It's the most conservative model that they use to do an assessment of the quality of the cleanup, meaning that the person would reside there, grow crops there, and eat the crops that were grown on site there. So that is the most conservative model. The MARSIMS is a document that's basically a methodology on how to do the sampling and the protocol to ensure that you look at so many square feet or meters, how many samples do you need to take. You develop a dose concentration guidelines, meaning the limits for each particular radionuclide, and those radionuclides selected are based on industry information. They're based on historical radioactive materials that were found on the site, and then the sampling that they're doing as part of this profiling. So some of that information is detailed in the Holtec document that was submitted, which is still currently under review by the state. I think we mentioned briefly, groundwater. There's no direct groundwater path to the site. There is no groundwater on the site. And Dave asked, well, how would you sample and control that? So we've been currently doing that with the tritium on site, on the well. Tritium is a radionuclide that you can't abate. You basically, it burns itself out, meaning it decays or it migrates out of that area. Where does it migrate? At the Pilgrim site, most of the water, as Matt has stated before, migrates to the ocean. So we don't have a drinking water path on site or really close to the site. Matt, refresh my mind, it's at least a couple of miles away.
Yeah, I think it's like 2 to 2.5 miles southeast of the site.
So Dave asked about, what they have found on site. And as Pat O'Brien said, if you think of the site where the reactor building was as the center of the bullseye, we're working in each of those concentric circles. And really the bulk of what we're doing and what we've asked split samples for right now are those outer rings, the areas that are not likely have been impacted by the operation of the plant. And of course, we'll be looking in more detail and asking for more samples to better profile as you get closer to the center of the bullseye. And when you find something in the ground, whether in a core bore or once a building's knocked down and you're excavating in the foundation areas, they'll do like it's called geospatial modeling, where what's the type of material, what's the type of the soil, how did it migrate, how far out do you have to dig to remediate it. That's all part of that process as we get, I'll say, towards the center of the bullseye. So I hope that clarified some of your questions, Dave.
Mary?
Yes, I have a couple of questions. The assumption that the further you get from the power reactor side, the less you're assuming, the less likely there's been any impact from the reactor. As you know, I disagree with that, having read the environmental monitoring reports provided by Boston Edison Company and Entergy. I gave examples of the 1982 BECO report and the Evans Farm residence, 0.7 miles west, and the Whipple Farm, 1.5 miles south-southwest, and others having cesium-137 greater than 1 million times expected. It was blamed by BECO on fallout. However, that doesn't hold true if you compare what the findings were at the control station. So what I'm saying is, if it could have gotten to the Whipple and Evans property, it certainly reasonably could have gotten a tenth or whatever, a mile on Pilgrim's property. Therefore, I would hope, and I expect, because I have full faith in Mass Department of Public Health, that that will be looked at. I also am concerned that the list of radionuclides that are being looked at is small. There were activation products. There was neptunium historically found on the site, which is a real bad one. And if I looked at Vermont Yankee, and it's a reactor of similar type in history, and the number of radionuclides they're looking for are more extensive. And so I would hope there'd be consideration of expanding the list. Also, I'm curious, I tried to figure out, but it's impossible, how it's determined if a radionuclide is found, whether it's a deal or not. There's a formula in Marsham or something. What I couldn't figure out is how the cumulative impact of multiple radionuclides in a little square is going to be assessed, because we don't just want one at a time. And additionally, the understanding in the settlement was that there was going to be the basement inventory model. And so once you get into the basements of these buildings, that practically every square inch will be looked at, and you won't be able to average, and particularly average the clean soil that will be dumped in the hole, which would water everything down. I did searches, which is really hard in that document, but I couldn't find that word, basement inventory model. Is it there, Jack?
So I really can't comment on the review because it's not complete by the state yet, but you are correct. A basement inventory model is also included in the settlement agreement for that. Some of the sampling that we're doing is iterative. I can't included in that document is, as you know, is a list of radionuclides, and there are some differences between Pilgrim's list and some other industry lists, but Again, that would be part of our state review process to comment on that. And then something else I was going to mention.
Yeah, I just have a few more comments.
I know what it was. You asked about the cumulative radionuclide. So the table that you looked at is basically the limit for a single radionuclide, say cobalt-60. So you have a table that has cobalt-60, that has cesium-137. So when you do that analytical work and you do the math, the sum of the fractions has to be less than 1. So not any single you're not evaluating it for any single radionuclide, you're evaluating it for every nuclide that's identified. And the sum of the fractions has to be less than 1.
Okay.
And then you would be less than the 10 or the 25 millirem limit.
And is there modeling going on the movement of radionuclides that would be found? Isn't there some sort of NRC formula or something? A model?
There is, there's a NOREG guidance document for decommissioning and surface modeling. And I don't know if Matt or John want to get into that in this conversation, but that has to be accounted for. Movement of the material in the soil has to be accounted for.
Yes, thank you. When you're doing, now this is for the non-radiological, there was concern in the periphery para 3 area of discussions over the years of what you could call midnight dumping. Couldn't figure out from where the boring sample, was taken, whether that was on the proper spot, A, and B, if you're taking borings or soil samples, that is looking for material that has already leaked or breached, if it wasn't in a container, breached it. So the question is, how do you determine if there are barrels? Because barrels, needless to say, can corrode, and so that's my question.
So Mary, John Dubinsky here. We did do a walk down of the area, and we did identify additional areas where soil sampling and monitoring wells will be installed. And based on aerial photograph interpretations, those are the areas that would be of greatest concern for potential midnight dumping.
Yeah, but that doesn't answer the question. The question was, how are you going to detect whether stuff is buried in barrels or a container? Because if you take the soil samples or water samples or whatever you do, which is great and important, that will detect what has already been released. My issue is that it's in there in a barrel and it has not been released. And so therefore, it would be important to be able to detect in some manner whether barrels are there, A, and B, if there are barrels, they are made of material that eventually, in fact, will corrode. So that's just, a helpful suggestion, hopefully.
Thank you. And what we did a detailed aerial photograph interpretation in areas that were likely where disposal activities take place. Those are the areas we're concentrating on to do subsurface analysis to see if we can detect those type of materials.
Okay,
thank you. Barrels do decay, but always you will find some evidence of residual results from the barrels being disposed of. So my personal experience doing this for more than 35 years, this is what we're doing, what we normally do. So I appreciate your comment. If there are barrels here, we will find them.
And the last comment, I circulated to the committee, everybody, and Holtec obviously included, questions of an analysis of the revised site assessment, and I hope both DEP and DPH will respond and answer some of those questions, number one. Number two, provided an analysis of how the report does not meet the settlement agreement. And that was provided to the Attorney General also and this committee. And so I hope all the ends will be put together and tied in a pretty bow, because that's the bottom line. It has to meet the requirements of the settlement agreement, and it certainly doesn't appear to have done so to date. So we look forward to that happening. I won't take any more time.
Pine? You said you had a couple of questions.
I'm not going to go back there, thanks. I'm all set.
Okay. Patrick, anything else?
I just had one more slide. So just want to conclude with the work remains on track. We continue to perform the work safely and keep our focus daily on the safety of our workers and the safety of the public. We continue to work closely with state and the NRC to ensure the compliance of our work, and we continue to commit to work with local stakeholders. So with that, I say thank you.
Pat, one question. The demolition and the removal of the buildings. So you've done this a few times already in the last 6 to 12 months. You come in, you show us, before and afters, and you did so again tonight, and then you've told us what's going to happen in quarter 3 and quarter 4.
Sure.
Is this going to be at consistently the same pace of work over the next 5 to 8 years, or is it going to be like an acceleration, like you're just coming into it, and actually the pace of demolition actually might accelerate and you'll see more?
Yeah, I know you're asking, and John and Dave can jump in and correct me if necessary, but I think we've actually been able, and I think I said this at the last meeting, to do some demo early that we had initially, when we looked at taking over the site, it wasn't in the plans, but because we do need some laydown areas, we've been able to do that. It's been pretty consistent, working our way through, but sadly, we're going to run out of outbuildings in more shorter, the outbuildings. When you come to the reactor building, the turbine building, those are a lot more deliberate. As right now, most of the buildings we're taking down are sheet metal buildings, ancillary buildings with not a lot of equipment in them. So that'll be, I think that's the 2024 timeframe. Dave or John want to jump in, and if I'm wrong, but we'll be looking to do the bigger demo is much more deliberate. This, while we're following all the regulations and working through, it's pretty consistent, straightforward, just moving through with the outbuildings as we no longer need them.
Yeah. Okay.
Actually, from overt indications, the pace will appear to slow, and that's based on the fact that there'll be a lot of internal systems and equipment materials removal, but a lot of these buildings built in the 1970s have some challenges in the way of asbestos material, PCBs that all need to be abated. Systems and components are part of that work. So as Pat said, 2024, 2025, we'll start to see the major portion of the demolition of the turbine and reactor building. So as we run out of the sheet metal outer buildings, the pace will really appear to slow.
Patrick, thank you again. So moving on to the next agenda item, it's Mr. Seth Pickering with an IWG activities update.
Good evening. Thanks very much for the opportunity to report out on the interagency work group. I'll be
Please make sure your microphone is turned on.
And be glad to take questions as we go along. So just as an update, DP and DPH are in the process of reviewing Holtec revised environmental assessment work plan, and we're coordinating with the AGO to formulate a response.
There we go. How's that? Is that better? Do you want me to start again, or am I good?
I could hear you, but I don't know if the people at
I don't
home,
know.
might
Did
as well
everybody
just
else?
start again, Seth.
So,
Thanks.
well, I'll get back to just the beginning of what I have to report out on. So DEP and Department of Public Health are in the process of reviewing Holtec's revised environmental assessment work plan. And we're currently coordinating with the Attorney General's office to formulate a formal response. We don't presently have an estimate of when that response will be, but the agencies are actively reviewing the submission. We are working on it. And under the Commonwealth Settlement Agreement with Holtec, Holtec will have 30 days after receiving the state's comments to revise and get us back information on the work plan.
Seth, do you have an estimate on that?
On when we're going to be done on the review, I can't really give you one.
Months or years?
Pine? Well, you know, we're working on it. We're coordinating with the AGO's office. That's probably the best answer I can give you at this time.
We're going to invite the AG.
Let's see, second item, the department, Mass DEP, and DPH continue to interact and meet regularly with Holtec to discuss the process of the decommissioning and the cleanup effort. There are also biweekly meetings that are going on between the asbestos section at Mass DEP in the Southeast region that reports to me, working actively on different projects that are ongoing at the facility. So that happens every 2 weeks. We're currently in the process of working with them on a cleanup in accordance with what's called a non-traditional work plan for the demolition of one of the fire protection water storage tank at the facility. Let's see. Just as an update, actually, it's really just going back over stuff that was discussed at the last NDCAP. Mass DEP did issue a notice of responsibility relative to reported releases of PFAS at the site and some metals, and a notice of noncompliance relative to a minor asbestos violation that occurred early on in the process of an abatement at the facility for some asbestos. So we're continuing to work with Holtec on that and any appropriate response actions. MEMA is continuing to attend monthly meetings with the local public safety officials and is the Commonwealth's main point of contact for communications, anything NRC related. So I don't know if anybody from my shop that's remote has anything they'd like to add, or if anyone has any questions, be glad to handle.
I'm still striving for some info on the PFAS. I know that we talked about it the last time, and there was some discussion about it being as a result of fire foam or something like that. Do you have have you narrowed down any of your thoughts on that at all, or can quantify the sort of the spread of that, whether it's really, you know, it was inside a building, there was a fire, we sprayed it, it got into a leak, it's therefore in the well, or if it was some more general ongoing practice routine that contained PFAS. You know, it's a big problem now. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case, but I'm wondering if you know.
So I'm gonna pass that along to Gerard. Gerard, you got something you want to say about that?
Well, I think it's, the assessment's really just started. I think they've only found the PFAS in a couple of wells. And as they go through this process and get more wells in and map out the extent of the PFAS and the concentration gradients in the area, it might have a better idea of what the source might be. John or Matt, you want to have any input on known potential sources of where PFAS may have been used at the facility?
Yeah, Gerard, that's a good summary. We don't have any specific criteria where we know PFAS has been used at the facility. The detections are just slightly above the drinking water standard, and as we discussed earlier, the water at this aquifer at the site is considered drinking water quality, so that's the criteria we're using. We've only seen it in 2 wells right now, and as you said, ongoing investigation will try to identify if we have a plume or just isolated sources. But Pine, you're correct, PFAS is a big issue in the Commonwealth, and most municipal water supplies are being analyzed for PFAS. And I think, in fact, the Plymouth supply does have traces of PFAS in the Plymouth supply. So it's an issue that we're dealing with, and at the end of the day, we'll be able to identify, based on our monitoring well network, if we have a PFAS issue or it's just a minor excursion in 2 wells. But as Gerard said, we're just in the early stages, but we will be analyzing all the wells for PFAS and hopefully come up with, if it's an issue, be able to resolve it. So,
And to put things in perspective, too, Pine, I think the concentrations we were seeing, the highest concentration might have been in the 30s, John?
Something like that.
PFAS?
Yeah,
And the standard is 20 parts per trillion. And the reason this is, and that's the GW1 standard, and that's the maximum contaminant levels standard. The reason this site is classified as groundwater 1 is not because there's current drinking water supplies out there. It's because it's a potentially productive aquifer, really good high yielding aquifer. And the state has identified all those across the Commonwealth as potential drinking water source areas, and therefore hold them to that higher standard of drinking water. But nobody is drinking the water out here where we're seeing the PFAS above the standard.
So my understanding, if I'm correct, or my fear if I'm correct, I guess I will say, is that this is east of the buildings closest to the bay. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so, I know we're all human-centered, but all of that water is drifting out into the water. And the PFAS is not any better for the lobster and the mussels and the fish than it is for us. So I think that it would be helpful if the department would expand its, urgency, its sense of urgency to protection of the bay as well as drinking water for people.
Well, evaluating the potential impact of the bay is a requirement of the MCP, where we do have PFAS in the groundwater migrating to the bay. The risk standards for potential impact to eco-risk is substantially higher than the drinking water standard. Okay, you do get a lot of dilution with the discharge into the ocean. And I don't know them off the top of my head, but they're orders of magnitude greater, the standards for potential eco-risks in drinking water.
And
as part of the work they're doing, like John said, they've got to figure out if this is a couple of spots where we have PFAS, or if we have a real PFAS plume, and what the concentration of that plume is as it's discharging into the bay, and based on that, look at whether or not there's any eco-risk.
And Pine, the Massachusetts contingency plan is very prescriptive in how we need to go forward to evaluate both human health risk and ecological risk. And Gerard is correct. We will, as we go forward, we'll be evaluating that. But right now, we're in the very, very early stages, and we're still drilling more wells. We'll get more information, and as we go forward, we'll be obviously communicating with you.
I appreciate all that, and I appreciate the effort. I understand the limitations of the MCP. What we're learning about PFAS is really unnerving, to say the least. The fact that there's so much of it around reflects a failure of our of our regulatory framework, that it's damaging the environment and the ecosystem, and people's wells in Massachusetts is a reflection of that. So all I'm trying to say is, let's keep our minds open in terms of really understanding what we have to protect and go after that. Okay, that's all I'm saying, and I appreciate it.
Nope, that's part of the process. That's absolutely part of the MCP process.
Mary's got a question.
Mary?
Yes, a personnel question. Both DEP and DPH are really, I believe, are key agencies in this for the eyes of the state. And for this review process, how many people, Jack, do you have? Do you have 2, 3 people helping you read and analyze this stuff? And the same for you. I just have, whether the state is properly staffed. I think the people here are great. My question is, everybody needs helpers. or whether you're playing solo, or whether you've got a robust staff, and so you feel good about it. What
So-
about you, Jack?
So Jack, you want to go first?
Oh.
Thanks. No, I don't want to go first. So,
Well, neither do I.
I'm currently the assigned person with DPH that's working on this project. I'm the director of the radiation control program. I have a couple of other staff members that are involved in other decommissioning projects that are going for our rad material licenses in the state. I'm pretty confident if that workload increases and I'm challenged on timeliness of reviews, that my secretariat would support us getting additional help to address those gaps.
Okay, thank you. What about you?
Gerard, you want to comment on the ESA for now, and then I'll do a little wrap up?
I was going to say pretty much what Jack said. Right now, this is an iterative process, and we're right at the beginning. I'm from an oil and hazardous, a non-radiological oil and hazardous material point of view. I'm the one who's been looking at submittals, working with Seth and the LSP. We have had internal discussions that as more data comes in, that we will likely assign more people to it, and we don't have an issue with assigning.
And so
I think there's some verbiage in the settlement agreement as well about our ability to support and analyze, the conclusion, the end point that we're trying to get to on the project. But, I've been with the state for several years, not as long as some of my partners here on this panel, but they've been very supportive. If I need help and we need assistance, and I'm not feeling overwhelmed right now, if I get to the point where I'm going to need that assistance, I have people I can reach out to.
So for me, it's been great having Gerard. It's his area of expertise, his 21E and MCP. For me, I'm new. I'm, doing my best to get my bearings, come up to speed. Last couple of weeks, making some progress on that. I'd say that by the time we get a chance to meet again, I'll be even more fully immersed. Moving forward in the types of things that need to be done potentially with permitting and things of that nature that fall under my responsibility. Actually, Gerard and our regional director, Millie Garcia-Serrano, had a conversation today. We are starting the process required by the settlement to get what's called the fast track project moving forward within the department. So we're going to have to take a look at some things that will address your questions, Mary. What level of effort, how many hours, things of that nature. In my bureau, my asbestos group is already working and doing the types of things they would be doing with any type of regulated asbestos activity when it comes to, abatement, removal, things of that nature. And then down the road, in particular in my group, my bureau, the solid waste section will be involved as well for, ultimate disposal of some of the things that will be, demolished on site. Mm-hmm. So, to date, we're good. We've been given our charge. We're doing the best that we can. And there will be other resources involved later on, depending on what phase of the decommissioning that we're in.
Great, thank you. Be assured the members of the public and the towns will rally to the support of both departments to beef it up, if that's your professional opinion. That's great. Okay, thanks.
It's not, we're good for now.
Good.
Yep.
Richard?
Just to follow up on Mary's question, and Seth, I think about a year or so ago, I asked David Johnston a related question regarding the IWG's ability to hire, retain outside consultants if the need arose, and in terms of was the state able to support such funding needs if that happened? I know at the start of this whole process, I believe the IWG hired another company to help out early on. I can't think of the name, but there's been a precedent there. So at least from my recollection, my sense is that, yes, if you needed, I think at the time David said that there was no need to hire anybody at that time, but if you had to, you could. Of course, a year or two later from that, things changed, so hopefully the funding would be there if you needed to.
I can't comment to that, Richard, but I will say that the process that we started today, looking into what we call an alternative schedule project, it's identified as a fast-track project in the settlement. I've got homework to do to identify, what the resources are and what we're going to need to move forward, at least on the DEP side, in terms of the types of permitting and things of that nature that will need to be done. Pretty much exclusively permitting requirements, if I heard that right. Would you agree with that, Gerard? I think you're on mute.
And I'm always so eloquent when I'm on mute. Yes, I agree completely with that.
So that's a little different between DPH and DEP, where my staff will be looking at more of the analytical data. I have the analytical laboratory is staffed. I actually just had a second chemist that started state service today. So I'm staffed, I'm equipped to handle the analytical work of the split samplers that were being provided by Holtec. And I don't have the challenge of the permitting that Gerard and Seth have. We're more aligned on the type of analytical review that we have to do.
All right, Seth, thank you. Looks like everybody's all set.
Okay, thank you.
Move on to Ms. Lampert. Quick summary of the town of Duxbury and their site visit that they took down at the plant, I believe, roughly about a week ago.
Correct. The Board of Selectmen of Duxbury asked that we could have a site visit and be joined by members of the town's Nuclear Advisory Committee. And off we went. There were 4 selectmen and 3 from the Nuclear Committee. And the overall impression, to a person, we're saying how delightful the personnel were. That's you, Pat. And yeah, and David Noyes and John Moylan and Pat McDonough. Couldn't have been more cordial, friendly, polite, professional, and were willing to entertain, our questions. So, yeah, hot was hot, but it was a very positive experience for those who attended, and would recommend that other towns or members of the public do the same. We're impressed, which you will be, by the security for us to enter. You had to give your Social Security, you had to give your license, you went through metal detector, you went through like a blow-dry machine for explosives, and anytime you had to do something else, then the routine would start somewhat again. So all in all, it was, a very positive experience. So I'd say the 2 impressions were really how nice the personnel are and what a great job they did, and the security. And that turned into a bit of an irony, because when Jim and I got home, I had an email from a security worker expressing that his feelings were that there were real security gaps. I shared a scrubbed version of that email with this committee, and obviously the Attorney General and a few others. Also, coincidentally, at the same time, I received photographs of 2 uninvited guests who were on site June 5th around midday and taking pictures around the ISV and up around the parking lot, et cetera. So there seems to be, the two coming together didn't really fit. And I think Rich Grassi, our member of this panel, did a bang-up job talking about the equipment that was at the new ISV, which is great. But there seemed to be a human factor. And I don't know how, but I should think in any security situation that this is a real difficult one to get a handle on. And the people seemingly are as important as a piece of equipment. And so, am I saying this because, to be mean or nasty? Absolutely not. I think it's a responsibility of the public, a responsibility of panel members here to make note of something like that. So we move forward. And so in sending material, those 2 pieces of material, to this panel, obviously, it went to Holtec too, because we're both working, we're all working on this. They don't want something to happen either. And so a lot was very impressive, and I'd encourage folks, in fact, to take a tour and encourage their town to do the same, because I think there's a lot to learn. And I'm telling you, you just treated royally. This partial brace and Band-Aid has nothing to do with the experience. And thank you. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to share it.
Let me just say that I appreciate anyone coming to see the site. I really appreciated you guys coming down. I appreciated you sharing the material. I did take the scrubbed version and put that into our corrective action program. I would say, understanding the workforce, some of the material in there was inaccurate, but that's what we want to look into, all those allegations, so we're going to work through that. Our security managers and site leadership, very professional on that, so we appreciate you sharing that, and that's something we'll work through.
Great, and I appreciate your sincerity.
All right, we're going to go into panel comments and questions. Anybody, if there's any unresolved questions or comments you want to make with respect to Mr. O'Brien, Mr. Pickering, or Ms. Lampert, and, the last hour we spent with those presentations. And I'll start off, and I'll throw this one at Mr. O'Brien or Dave Noyes or Mr. Moylan up on the screen. So Patrick, when we talk about security, and we know that the new pad has 6 canisters on it and there's no spent fuel in them. So the security is minimal. So next week, we're going to start transitioning, you're going to start transitioning canisters with material in it up to that pad. So how does security evolve?
So security's been fully staffed up there since, I believe it's June 11th or 12th, and Dave Noyes would know off the top of his head.
We were told the last week of May.
It was actually the 3rd week in May.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So security is staffed 24/7, armed security. Nothing changes. You've just taken the footprint of this, and it will eventually be this. So it's a highly trained, professional staff. If you come up to the site, there's a security building that's part of the pad. There's an additional building that houses additional security that's separate from inside the protected area. So every movement of fuel, there's a security complement to that particular move. But a lot of it is obviously safeguarded on what I can say from that perspective. I don't know if John or Dave want to add anything specifically to the...
So obviously, some people are implying that, with the canisters already present there that don't have any spent fuel in it, security was, it was going to transition to a higher level, if you will, upon actually canisters with material in that. But those processes are already in place, and there's nothing to, I'm not articulating it
Yeah, I'm trying to
properly,
figure out
but
what
you
you're
understand what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, I do. And what I can say is from the pictures that were taken in the areas that the people went, they never crossed a security area. They never entered the PA, they never entered the SOCA. Right now, obviously, as the project's getting up there's a lot of work going on up there, so
Sure.
there are a lot of people. But obviously, as loaded fuel now comes up the hill, that will be a much more restricted area.
Thank you.
Those boundaries are as they are based on NRC regulation, and it's based on conceivable threat to the canisters and the material that are in them. So the particular exclusion area that has been established, and nobody was anywhere near that physical exclusion area, are the boundaries that are established for adequate protection of the fuel based on a range of potential threats.
All right, Dave, thank you.
Let me just add one thing, John, because I know it was raised in the slide deck, and this was something I should have brought up in my presentation. Last week, I finally got confirmation from the Attorney General's office as well as the town of Plymouth on the visual screening plan. We had sent that to the AG back in April and had been waiting their approval. So that did just finally get approved, so we're going to be moving forward with that as well. So I know there was some concern about, well, there's been no plantings. Well, per the agreement, we needed to have it approved by both the state and the town.
The deer are eating our arborvitae like mad.
There's no arborvitaes in the plant. And they're already in the planting. I told Pine earlier all the different types of trees, but there's no arborvitaes.
All right, Mr. Rothstein?
Patrick, earlier this year, I believe I asked a question about the disposition about the lower pad once the upper pad is fully loaded with the casks, and would NRC have to get involved in terms of anything being done with the lower pad, whether it would be used for other purposes or demolished, or would maybe make a nice helipad?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm not going to sell the
Fly
pad.
in and out.
No, it'll be decommissioned eventually as part of the project. So similar to everything else that's around it, it will be decommissioned.
So it's not going to be a permanent fixture in the
No.
scheme of things?
No, and per the Attorney General's agreement, if and when, and everyone can say whatever they want, the fuel goes somewhere. There's plan and there's money as part of that agreement that would then decommission that as Fissy Pad as well down the line.
Hurry up. I'm 79.
So Patrick, you're gonna exclude drones from flying over the casks and stuff? You're gonna capture them?
I don't know what the requirements are. I'd have to ask my security manager, but I know there are requirements related to that.
Yeah, I assume that there are too, but I, just seems like with the level of security and the prevalence of drones these days, I mean, we're getting another one down at the Riverside, So I just, I just don't know what kind of, and I think
Let me put it this way.
The concern of the
Yeah.
public is it so easy to take stock of what's going on that we can put a plan together? And I know when Rich made his presentation, he had suggested there be kind of a neighborhood watch sort of thing. And I think it's useful to have people more engaged in the protection rather than being afraid that it's not. And so having methods for people to participate in that are in the neighborhood, that are in the town, that are part of that, who do have a stake in the safety and security of it, that would benefit you guys.
No, absolutely, I agree. The more eyes, the better, and the communication. I will say that my security manager is watching. He did mention, he said there's no FAA requirements, but they're going to look into what's there.
Mr. Grassi?
Just a simple, straightforward comment. Basically, when you're talking about security of the ISFSI, and you're talking about the electronic, you're talking about the physical defenses, and you're talking about the manpower, and you're talking about the procedures and the signage and the architectural, you're talking about all the elements that fit into a day-to-day security picture. the most important aspect of security at Pilgrim is not one of those, in my estimation. The most important aspect, and what I have a meeting with the chief of police to discuss the first week in August, the most important aspects are, one, the neighborhood watch. I think separate from the police department, separate from Holtec, CDI security, you need to involve the citizens in the protection not only of themselves, but the site. Two, I have been involved in a number of experiences. My last experiences was in San Diego, where I did vulnerability tests of sites. I think I mentioned that to you before. I think that force-on-force exercises are vitally important, but I don't think we're going to see them, from NRC at least. For an operating plant, yes. To my knowledge, Patrick, there are no other force-on-force exercises at the other sites that are either decommissioned or in the process of decommissioning.
Correct.
Yeah, I believe that to be true, but I'm not.
Okay,
100%
number
sure.
3. And this is a very important element, and I've been involved in this with a number of Fortune companies where they have asked me to help them figure out how to social monitor outside the community, inside the community, to get the chatter that eventually you note that there's somebody who's targeting the plant, or there's a word that comes out. They're doing that. NSA does it on a grand scale. I'm going to meet with the chief and discuss with him how that happens locally. We need advance warning, and the FBI has an excellent intelligence capability that they have a direct line to the plant that they'll give them notification way before anything can happen, and then we can increase the social media monitoring to target certain words, if that can be done, and I think it can be done at the state level. And I think the task force at the state police level does that in terms of monitoring, the bad boys or whatever, all these groups that are coming up. And that's the third element, that's intel. So you can talk about all the fences and all the cameras and all the people. These are the most important elements right now in terms of the security of that site, in my estimation.
Anyone else? Mr. Smith, you've been very quiet tonight. I'm kidding. Okay, moving on. Public comment, public questions, public participation time. Anybody want to go up to the microphone, have any questions or comments? Yes, go ahead.
Please make sure the green light is on.
There, okay. Is that better? Yes. Okay. Henrietta Cosentino with the League of Women Voters of the Plymouth area. And I wanted to go back to the security issue, talking about the slides that Mary sent around. It still concerns me that even though the canisters were empty on June 5th, apparently, those visitors were able to get all the way to the upper parking lot, where, had they chosen to cross the parking lot, they could have been very close to the reactor building and the fuel pool, where there is still considerable spent fuel. Hasn't been loaded into canisters yet. And I think we do need to be very concerned about bad actors, terrorists, whether foreign or domestic. And these days in our country, there seem to be a lot of domestic terrorists who have grudges. There could be such people in Plymouth, who knows? But those areas that were traversed in those slides may not be strictly within the high security area according to the NRC, but common sense would tell us that they actually are too close for comfort, too close to the canisters and too close to the reactor building. And I want to appreciate the idea that both Pine and Rich put forth, because I think those are two very, very important ideas. The idea of having the community involved engaged with the question of security. Really important. I'm not sure how you do that in that area of Manomet where there aren't any kind of homes really within stone's throw of the site, and so I don't know what a watch, what do you call, neighborhood watch. I'm not sure how that could be mobilized, but it seems like a productive idea. And what Rich was saying about the most important elements of security, I agree. It's the human element, and it's the intel, and it's the engagement of the whole community. Those things are very important. I wanted to ask, I guess, Pat, specifically about cameras. Are there, I presume there would be surveillance cameras?
Yes.
And how many are there?
I can't tell that per,
Really?
yep. I can't tell you that for safeguards. I'm not going to tell you what our security.
Oh, no, I'm not, I'm not trying to, I'm just.
No.
But I'm kind of curious, because if there are cameras, how is it that those, okay, next question. Who monitors the cameras?
Security officers. Pine has actually been inside and seen what those cameras are capable of doing.
There's
Okay.
a ton of security cameras, and there's multiple people watching them.
And what I will say is.
24/7?
Yeah, and what I will say is during this time, we've also had a number of people up there working. Some of the temporary security measures you can see while we've been moving fuel have been going on up there. There's been a lot of activity related to site characterization, so there's a lot of activity up there. It's not like there's just no one up there.
Okay, well.
I'm saying outside the security area.
Right.
So it's not abnormal to see
In
people
those
up there.
photographs, it certainly appears as if there's nobody. All these signs about patrolling, armed guards patrolling, no evidence of them. And I think you said something about
Hold on a second. So is it the intention that you want to run into an armed guard?
Oh, no.
Is that what you're
Good
trying to
Lord.
prompt?
No,
That kind of
wait a minute. It's not me, first of all, my desire. I'm talking about I'm just trying to understand the security situation, how it is that two people could get that close to the chain link fence and to the parking lot and to the reactor building without encountering anybody.
The parking lot's open right now because we've been working up there, and that's what I'm trying to say to you, is there's a number of projects going on, and we've had a lot of people up there as part of the contract to do a lot of this work.
Right,
So
but
it's
can
not
anybody wander
abnormal.
up there? Or
What's that?
can anybody wander up there?
If someone drove up, you could drive up to the parking lot. Obviously not as we start to move fuel next week. That will be restricted, and that'll be very, very different than when they came in early June when we had a number of people up there working.
I see.
So and again, I want to make this point. They got inside of no security areas. They're in a public area that's a parking lot on our site. As anyone that comes down and tours the site, you can drive into any parking lot. They did not cross any security barriers.
the new pad, whenever individuals wanted to set up a site visit with Mr. O'Brien or anyone else from Holtec,
Yes.
there was you didn't have to require to go through security hoops because it was outside of the secure area. That was
Okay.
that was known from the
Okay,
beginning.
I understand that, but that's not what I'm trying to get at. Supposing there's a bad actor who has a hand or a shoulder-mounted grenade launcher or some kind of a very powerful weapon that could penetrate a canister or penetrate the fuel pool, how, supposing some such individual gets up there, right next to the wall, goes all the way up next to the canisters, or goes the other direction and up to the parking lot, and goes across the parking lot and aims something at the fuel pool. I'm just trying to understand how the security would deal with that.
It's a threat-based assessment, so they would, with the camera works that we have, I can tell you the color of someone's bathing suit in Provincetown or the badge number on the cop that's doing the traffic out front. 'Cause
Okay.
We've seen that before. So
Okay,
if someone's walking up, they would notice that they had an RPG on their shoulder. That would be a threat.
I
So
see.
then you would
And what would
respond
then
accordingly.
happen?
Yes, that was not the case, obviously, in this situation.
no, but did anybody notice those people?
I can't say that for sure. I haven't even checked with security management on that.
I know, there is a figure in somewhere like slide 16 or 17, and with very high-powered cameras, maybe you could figure out who that
Yeah,
figure is or
Yeah.
what.
but yes, again, I just want to stress that they cross no security areas. The pad is safe. It's built to the requirements.
But
And
I'm not asking
And
about
security is to requirements.
No, I understand.
Okay.
I understand that. It's all
Henrietta would.
accord with new reg this and new reg that. I'm just actually talking about the common sense of, clearly, I don't know if it's true now, but on June 5th, people were able to get right up, basically to the chain link fence. And that seems a little close for comfort.
Okay.
It may be according to regulation, but it doesn't make a lot of sense, because we are talking about nuclear material, and, which is a grave threat if breached, obviously.
And again, in
Right.
June 5th, there was no nuclear material up at that site.
Yeah, but there was a reactor building.
And the reactor building's visual from the street. I don't
Yeah,
know where you're
but
trying to go with
All
that.
right,
No, I'm trying to go with, what if a terrorist had a
Again,
high-powered weapon
again, it's
and
a
could
highly-
get
there'd be a
to the-
different result. There'd be a different result. Guaranteed.
If I walk
Different
up, they know
result.
me. If you walk up, they probably wouldn't assign you as a threat, Henrietta, just by appearance. So they do that threat-based assessment on.
I have to take your word for it
Okay.
because I have no choice, I have no, you haven't presented any actual evidence.
Well, so the problem is, when you have a robust security system like this, you can't tell the public everything that you do to secure a particular site, because in doing so, you're compromising your very security. And I'm not a security expert. That makes complete sense to me. Mr. Grassi, am I off base there? Am I off base on that assessment? Okay. All right, Henrietta, that was 8 minutes. Is there anyone else? Ms. Turco, you're next.
Okay. Pat, you said the parking lot was public?
Able to be accessed by the public.
So if somebody's on the parking lot, could they be arrested for trespassing?
Yes, because they've come on the site without authority.
Invitation.
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
It's public in the sense that you can access it.
Right.
It's not public in the sense that everyone can come down and hang out. People that are coming to the site for a visit can come down and park. You're not going to be checked before you get into the parking lot.
Okay, but the parking lot's public, but you can be arrested for being on the parking lot. Okay.
The pub-
That doesn't,
It's
it doesn't.
it's public, I'm not saying public
Right.
property, I'm saying it's public in the sense that you can access it.
Okay, and also too, I just want to know that that whole area says armed guards, no trespassing, trespassers will be prosecuted. I think what Henrietta is saying is, anybody who goes on that property, somebody should say, hey, get off here, you're near a nuclear waste dump, it's got volatile materials, and it can be accessible by terrorists to damage the canisters. There's weapons on the market right now that can do that. No one should be walking on that property at all, no matter who they are, whether you see a weapon or not. That's just common sense, because there are weapons on the market that hit through those vents and damage those half-inch cans and cause a lot of issues. And we know the mitigation issue is that Holtec is going to cover it with a larger canister, but that can's down in New Jersey. So there really is no mitigation problem if somebody blows up one of those cans.
And again, we've done testing that you can fly an
Right.
airliner into it and it will not penetrate the
Right, I know,
canister.
I know. Holtec says nothing can happen, we know. No credible actions there, we know that. We don't believe it, though. Anyways, we also have people on our side who say, no, that's not true. But I have a question. I just received a notice from the NRC that they're asking for supplemental information on the emergency planning for the pad only. Is there somebody here who could answer a question about emergency planning?
Dave, do you know offhand if we've received RAI?
We have, yeah, we've received RAIs and we're drafting the response to that.
Okay, so I'm talking about the July 9th one, Dave?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so you submitted an application on February 18th of this year for a ISFSI emergency plan only. You added a supplemental information on May 20th, and so now you've got July 9th here. In the NRC, I just thought it was interesting. The NRC is asking a question. Holtec says that ambulance services are provided by the American Medical Response, and it's coordinated. And so the NRC says, please clarify that the American Medical Response provides transportation for contaminated, injured personnel. So I was wondering, can you answer that question?
That we actually use Brewster Ambulance, but Brewster Ambulance is trained and fully capable of handling a contaminated individual.
Okay, I was wondering why you didn't change that, because this last input from Holtec still used the American Medical Response as the ambulance service, and they haven't serviced this area in years. I called them up. They've been out of the South Shore for years, so somebody must have called you and said it was Brewster, because you would have changed it on this report. And also, they will not transport a contaminated, injured personnel. They will not.
And it's immaterial. We use Brewster through the Plymouth Fire Department, and they are trained, and we provide supplemental training and perform exercises to verify that we can transport a contaminated, injured individual to the hospital.
Okay, I spoke with the Plymouth Police Department, and they said that Brewster will not transfer a injured, contaminated person. So I'm just wondering why, this is an NRC reg, and that's the information that I got from the Plymouth Fire Department. They won't do it. So I just don't know why this is happening, why, first of all, you're using the wrong ambulance service in your report 3 times, and I found out that they won't transfer a injured, contaminated person. I mean, I don't know how you do your emergency planning, but I'd be a little bit concerned if I worked at Holtec, if that's the way the company's protecting me. And one other thing, I have to thank Holtec, though, for agreeing with the New York State to pay for take half of the DOE money that they get for the waste management and putting it back in the Decommissioning Trust Fund. I wish we got that here. Indian Point, I'm sorry, what did I say? Whatever.
You're right. You
New
said
York,
New-
but
you said
Indian
New York,
Point,
you're right.
I
Yeah.
think that's great.
Thank you.
Will that be a company policy that we could also get half
No,
the money that
we have our
used-
agreement with the state of Massachusetts.
Okay.
We've subsequently done one with New York, and we
Okay.
will continue
Guess-
to do agreements as we move forward.
I guess we lose once again.
Okay. Diane, thank you. Well, time for a couple more minutes. One more member of the public. You all good?
John, I want to add something.
All right, go ahead, Mr. Priest.
Yeah, so, the ambulance services and Brewster, we drill with MEMA and the Department of Public Health, my radiation response team, and we have in the past transported an injured worker to the hospital, and we drill and practice, and we do have an agreement for transportation of contaminated, injured individual. So if there was a construction accident today or tomorrow at the site and we needed to transport somebody, they're fully trained and prepared to do that.
All right, Jack, thank you. Time for one more public comment via Zoom. James Lampert. Jim, we got 2 minutes.
A couple of questions, frankly, with really probably for Seth Pickering. Question, minor background. My wife and I spent well over 100 hours trying to review that May 28th plan. And I can have her concern about the state's ability to do it in a friendly, timely basis. I guess my first question, Mr. Pickering, is when do you expect your review to be done and start sending comments back?
I don't have a date for you, Mr. Lambert. We're working on
Do you have
it.
a general idea?
I do not.
Will it happen in the next 2 months?
I just answered that question. I don't know when it's going to be done.
Second question is, as you know, my view is fairly clear that what you have received, what the state has received, doesn't come close to satisfying the requirements of paragraph 11 of the settlement agreement. Are you going to make the decision whether it does? And if not, who's going to?
So the interagency work group will review the information, we'll work on it. We work with the Attorney General's office, and that's the process as far as the way I understand it.
Do you have any reason to believe that this does satisfy it?
I can't answer that question right now.
So basically, we don't know when the review is going to be started, and we don't know whether they satisfied, have done what they've agreed to do, and I guess that's where we are. I would also just suggest that my wife and I together have sent this panel a lot of information over the past week or two. And I'd suggest that the panel, if it's going to provide the advice and listen to the input and the reports it's getting and provide a public conduit for information, there are a lot of questions you should know the answer to. And there's a lot of review that should be done, and I hope it will be done. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Jim. What, you're all set, right? Huh? All right, we're coming to the, I'm sorry, I'm going to hand it off to Mr. Ross. Go ahead, talk to me, Diane. Can we make this quick? What's going on?
No, I just wanted to say that back in security at Pilgrim, I've been on the property with reporters and not been identified. One time I was on with our friend Lamar, walking the property while Cheryl did not, somebody HDHTV was reporting us. We came back on the truck for a road before on guards on Rocky Road, and they didn't know we were on the property. We filed with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission they were concerned about the security and the safety of our communities. We filed with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission about that, and they just dismissed it. Right now, I was on the property with 2 NPR reporters. They invited me to go with them. We were on the property, no security.
I know, she's,
Yeah, John, we can't hear anything on the.
yeah, they
one
can't,
side.
I just want the panel to know that
maybe you can hold that thought and we can come back to that in the next meeting, Diane. They can't hear you out in Zoom land. Mr. Rothstein, before we move on to the last topic.
Well, this is the hardest part of the meeting for me.
And me too.
Maybe me 3. The adjournment of this meeting, I will be stepping down from serving formally on the NDCAP. I submitted my resignation to John and Pine and our town officials yesterday. I've appreciated the opportunity and responsibility formally serving on the NDCAP since December 2018 when I got appointed. You know, they say time flies when you're having fun. Can't believe so much time has passed. I have had fun, you know, and I'll explain real briefly in a moment. I'm going to miss interacting with my fellow NDCAP colleagues on a regular basis, some who which I've been interacting with personally and professionally since the mid-2000s on other Pilgrim-related committees, and even going back to the mid-1980s with Seth when I was working for a living, working very hard back then too. And so it's a small world. Although I'm formally resigning, I'm still professionally interested in the ongoing Pilgrim decommissioning effort. You know, as Bill Parcel said when he stepped down from coaching, I may be stepping down from coaching, but it's just still in my blood. Just can't leave it alone. But I'm ready to take a welcome break, given other priorities and obligations that I also need to tend to. As I said, although I'm formally resigning, I'm still professionally interested in the ongoing Pilgrim decommissioning effort. If anyone wants or needs my technical advice or opinion, you know where to reach me. And don't be surprised if you see me sitting out here from time to time, as I was doing from 2016 to 2018. Thank you.
All right, Rich. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, yes, of course. And the committee also got another resignation over the course of the weekend. Myself and Ms. Dubois got an email from Mr. Sean Mullen. So Sean also submitted his resignation, just, a professional, just commitments, can't, doesn't have the time anymore. So obviously, loss of two talented individuals, Mr. Rothstein and Mr. Mullen, and I'll formulate a plan to obviously communicate to the respective designees to see if we can fill those openings as quickly as possible. So we're going to circle around to the second thing on the agenda tonight. We really didn't touch on it, was the review of the template for the meeting minutes. And Mr. Priest had submitted a, was it an Excel spreadsheet? Word document, some sort of a template, so that we can start properly documenting questions that the committee comes up with. And then instead of kicking those cans down the road, we can tackle them. We can eliminate redundancy and hopefully get some of these answered in a timely fashion and stop asking the same question over and over, if you will. So just wanted to know if anybody had any thoughts on that document, and then if anybody has any topics for the next and upcoming meeting, which obviously will be approximately 60 days from now.
Surprise.
Yes, Ms. Lampert.
Yes. I have a vested interest in mentioning also, my husband put forth a template which sort of built upon Jack Priest, and perhaps an amalgamation, taking the best of each, might be a thought. Whatever. But we certainly appreciate Jack taking on the effort and what he did, as you certainly have a lot of other things to do. But also, my husband wasn't paid to do it either, and I think it's worth looking at. And maybe the panel will come up with the best of two worlds.
All right, Brian?
So maybe Jack and you guys can get together and come up with one document. I think what Jack's basic thrust, I think, was something that we've been talking about or trying to get around to for quite a while, and that is to have an ongoing list and a method for addressing the questions that are raised at the meetings but are kind of dangling in space. So his method was to have one of the panel members here take on the task during the meeting of focusing on those questions, writing those down, creating a schedule for following up or a method for following up on those things, so they don't just drift around in orbit.
Great idea.
And honestly, I haven't had a chance to study what Jim sent. I had way too many emails about this, in addition to the fact that I don't have any staff. So I think that having you guys work on it and come up with a method, because currently what happens is a very dedicated staff member in the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs looks at all of this YouTube stuff and translates the minutes for us. And that's why they're 9 pages long. okay? If I were doing them, they would be 2.5 pages long. So, and in large print. So I think there's a happy medium. I love the fact that they're so detailed because it really helps when you do forget, or in my case, are distracted during the meeting and can't follow everything that's said. But I do think that we are losing ground, or not, maybe not losing ground, but not gaining the ground that we could if we would have a schedule for following up. So if I can task you guys, Jack, what do you think about this? Can you work with the Lamperts to join a thing?
I'll finish that commitment up, Pine, and work with Jim, and we'll come up with a
method.
A document that we can send up to you and John as the chair to adopt.
I think that would be a great approach. I mean, we are going to be in this thing for another 7 years or so.
I didn't get a chance to look at what Jim submitted.
I didn't either.
Yeah, I'll work through that.
Okay,
Thanks, Jack.
I appreciate that.
Dave Nichols.
Yeah, I would just, I thought it was great, and having struggled through Excel spreadsheets as a way to organize information, I get the limitations sometimes in these boxes, and the public obviously has an interest in understanding the answers to these questions too as they come in. So as you're thinking about this, to take into consideration how to then be able to publish that information, whether it's in, converting it into some sort of frequently asked questions document, I think that would also help the public in avoiding repeating some of the questions that we hear over and over again as well.
Great.
Mr. Smith?
Yes, I have to agree with John. A bit of a policy wonk myself. So I see it as anybody can ask a question, and certainly everyone's entitled to ask a question. Whether the question reflects accurately statements therein, okay, or whether it's addressed to the right person. For instance, so many of the questions.
Please make sure the green light is on.
Is his microphone on?
No.
Okay. Thank you. Jack, certainly respect your opinion, but all the questions that come before the NDCAP don't necessarily belong to the State Department of Environmental Protection or to the State Department of Public Health. Certainly, they are the regulators, they are the enforcers, they are the authority figures on this panel, okay? But there are other regulators, other authority figures, and other opinions that I guess what I'm saying is that as I see the process, this really isn't a process. It's a nice list. Okay, we're going to end up with some dates on it. We're going to end up with some questions half answered, maybe not answered to the questioner's desire. To approve it as is, I think it needs more work. I think it needs an approval process.
Thanks for volunteering.
I was going to say that thing too.
Mr. Priest.
Good. Rich Rothstein?
I'd like to commend the state for the support they've been able to give in compiling the monthly meeting minutes. And just a simple example, when the annual NDCAP report, like the last one, was being prepared, it was important to have all those detailed minutes because it made Pine's life and Rich Grassie's life a lot easier trying to summarize as part of the report what actually happened over the past year. Sometimes we can't remember what happened maybe over the past 2 or 3 months. I'm not talking even about NDCAP, anything. And if the panel's still thinking of the same kind of approach whenever the next report is going to be coming out, I'd strongly urge the state to continue providing at least that kind of compilation as a minimum.
Rich, I think, we're trying to work through a process and capture, what we need as a panel to review and capture things and communicate things effectively. And we also were trying to have a better tool, so when members of the citizens ask questions, you know, to create basically a question and answer library and make sure that those concerns and questions get captured. And then, you know, as the panel, we should be obligated to get answers to those. Whether they agree with the answers or not, that, you know, that changes. But as it is right now, we're covering a lot of ground each meeting, repeating questions and going back and forth, and did we answer that or not really answer it? So we're really just trying to work through a tool, and I expect it to be an iterative process. You know, we won't necessarily get it all right the first time, but we wanted to get started and move on that pathway. So that's why I commit to, you know, I'll work with Jim, other members of the panel that have some suggestions and ideas. We'll try to incorporate those as well. So look at the emails that went out. Here's your opportunity to help us make that process work better.
I think it's great you're planning to do what you're planning to do for the reasons that were expressed there. And again, my comment was reflecting on the other aspect of the panel, being obligated to put an annual report together. But if all that could be done easily with the new process there, God bless everybody, and let's go that way. But I just found, at least going back to the most recent annual report, that it was helpful having the detailed meeting minutes as is. Not that that's sufficient in itself, as you're saying.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, this new process wouldn't replace the meeting minutes. The meeting minutes is a requirement of the open meeting law, so that's always going to continue.
Right,
Yeah.
Right, I don't think we're going to take Tori Kim off the hook at EEA, but I do think this will streamline our ability to track what we need to do.
Okay, Pine, you want to move on to?
So did you appoint Paul to this? Lampert's, Jack, and Paul?
I'd be happy to input to Mrs. Lampert and to Mr. Priest, yes.
Okay, thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Okay, all right, fantastic. We'll, looking forward to the finished product. Okay, so last thing on the agenda tonight, Pine wants to discuss CSG East.
Okay, so in my concern, I guess you will say, for the long-term storage issue that we have, all security aside, the fact that we understand how difficult having an interim or long-term storage facility is. I've been racking my brains, and I stumbled across a group that I didn't know exists, and I don't know if you all do. Some people do, some people don't. It's called CSG. CSG is the Council of State Governments. It's been around for 87 years. And interestingly enough, there's a regional group called CSG East. I invite you to look it up online. CSG East includes all the Canadian provinces, all of New England down to Maryland, and a couple of islands. And within CSG East, there is an environment and energy group. And lo and behold, the chairman of the Environment and Energy Group is none other than Mark Pacheco, who happens to be a nearby state senator. They also have a staff person that heads up that group. They also have the nuclear energy transportation person who has been to Pilgrim. So I would like to invite them via Mark Pacheco, and I've reached out to them, but I just haven't heard back from him because I know he has more to do than I do. So to come and join us here, because in my mind, at least, relying solely on transporting the waste 3,000 miles to the other side of the country in somebody else's backyard is not necessarily a sound rationale. So I would like to challenge our New England states and innovators, our academia, and our industries I just got the chills.
Maybe that was a signal.
Are we on generator?
No, that.
We got a town hall scram going on.
There's lights across the street.
It was a timer.
I think you're on generator, you have the short lights on. No, it's like the house is.
Is the web still here? If you guys hear us, would you wave? Okay, awesome. I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say that anymore. I think I was saying we're challenging. You guys with me? So just continuing on with that thought, I would like to challenge the, our state government to try to help NDCAP and the other NDCAP. So we have nuclear waste stored in Maine. We're soon going to have it in Vermont. We have it in Massachusetts already. We're going to have it in Connecticut. We're working on New York and New Jersey. And I think that if all of these notable, innovative states around us would work together to solve this problem, we might have a chance. So I don't see it for hundreds, let alone thousands, tens of thousands, or millions of years sitting on top of Cape Cod Bay like it is. So I would like to invite them here, and I wanted to throw that out to the group. I would like you to go and explore CSG East. I would like it, if you know Senator Mark Pacheco, to reach out to him and encourage him to come. In our report that Rich was mentioning, that we sent to the governor and the legislature in December, we asked Governor Baker to come to us and to talk about this, and he assigned that to his Secretary of Environmental Affairs, Katie Theoharides, and I think it's unfair to invite her here without some substance. So I would like actually to invite the Secretary and Mark Pacheco, Senator Pacheco, to the same meeting and see if we can get some support from them to look into this. And then I would challenge us at NDCAP to start reaching out to the other NDCAPs and to create the kind of public forum that we need in order to seriously address this in a productive and reasoned way. Well, you know, at least there's an idea here that we can work on, right? I'm encouraged because they're centered in New York. They have staff. They put on forums, and their whole mission is to solve problems. So this is a problem. Unless you guys don't think it's a problem, I think it's a problem. So I'd like to continue with that. Go ahead, Seth.
Quick question. So, I mean, does this really go towards long-term storage?
It goes toward addressing the fact that it's stored on that site. That's what it goes toward. So yes, it goes toward what else can we do. I know a few years back, and I was curious about this, and I tried to find out what happened, and I haven't been able to yet because I don't stay on one subject long enough, I think. But MIT, you know, had a nuclear reactor in the center of Cambridge in the basement where they were using spent nuclear fuel. And I don't know what happened. I don't know what the result of that little experiment was, but I'd like to know. So, you know, I think that we have to do better. We have to do better as the state of Massachusetts. We have to do better as a society to address this waste problem. It's been kicked around for 60 years now, and we got to deal with it, in my opinion.
So,
Yeah, go ahead.
well, I just think, you know, I just want to raise the issue about whether or not that really falls within the scope of, you know, this panel. And I'm not saying that it's not something we can't explore, but, you know.
Yeah, I think it comes well within the decommissioning part, you know, and given that we're an advisory group, I think that it's well within that means. I think it's untenable, really, to bear an expectation that we're going to be able to be safe and secure on that site over the course of climate change, running down the road like this.
license. for
Somebody
the
doesn't like what I'm
estate, and
saying.
Until it is decommissioned, the site is not
Yeah.
completed.
Seth, if you go back to the March meeting minutes that are online, I forget if you were here for that meeting, but this issue that you're raising, is this within the scope or purview or not? We discussed this, it's in the minutes.
Okay.
You'll see it there, and
All right.
as Pine said, it is really part of it.
Mr.
Pardon.
Mahoney, I just, as a human being, okay, I totally agree, okay, with Ms. Pine, but it has been discussed, as Rich said, in the nuclear matter, it's been discussed in the state, okay? It would almost seem like NDCAP, we're supposed to be advising the governor, okay? And what, if I may suggest, just a synopsis of the action, we should bump it up to the governor, and it should be our federal legislators that should be working on the national issue with 100 reactors out there that are all going to end up like Pilgrim. Not up to this point.
You don't think this is the end of the idea, do you?
Oh. Could be. But anyway.
We'll put that on the agenda in 60 days from now. We'll come back to that. Our time's done. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Second.
All those in favor? All those opposed?
Hey,
Seeing you around.
don't worry,
Yeah.
I'm not,
Is it me?
actually, I, in the, close
He'll
the.
be handing you his resume before he leaves. Seth, very nice to meet you.
Nice to
I'll
meet you.
talk